Global trends are moving towards abolishing the death sentence. Wired for empathy, media coverage of executions behind prison walls appeals to our human instincts. But are voices of victims not heard?
There are many liberal NGOs right now where their voice is very loud and they are very influential. The coverage of the conservatives is, I would say, very rare. For example, victims of crimes are not really covered, but the criminals' human rights are more covered by the liberal NGOs.
Due to its proximity to the Golden Triangle, the area known for opium and amphetamine production, Malaysia can become a central hotspot for increased drug activities.
The trafficker who traffics a certain amount of heroin or drug, amphetamine, do you know what damage is done to the victim? You forget about that, because you don't see the victim. You don't see the victim. There are maybe thousands of victims who become drug addicts for life. And you start thinking like that. You start thinking the way I said. You will consider that the traffickers deserve to be hanged.
In 1983, the government took a zero-tolerance policy on traffickers and imposed the mandatory death sentence.
Actually, when my father was a judge, every time he does a criminal trial involving death penalty, which is normally murder, he's quite distracted. It affects the person to impose a death penalty. So, in my opinion, given a chance, a judge would not impose death penalty. And that is why, when it comes to drug, the government at that time thought there's no other way but to tie the judge's hands and say, if you find this fellow guilty, then you must sentence him to death.
Today, out of 1,300 prisoners on death row, 70% are for drug offences. Yet many nabbed are dispensable mules and cannot prove a drug lord's guilt. In 2018, the Malaysian government passed a bill to remove the mandatory death sentence for drug trafficking and placed a moratorium on all death sentences. The death penalty currently applies to 33 offences, 11 of which are mandatory, where judges have no option but to impose a death sentence if guilt is found.
Murder is causing the death of another person with intention to kill. Punishment for such an offense, i.e. Murder, is death. There is no alternative. If you cause death but accidental death, then the punishment is lesser than death penalty. Kidnapping is death penalty. Carrying firearms under there is a law called Firearms Increased Penalty Act, which the authorities have not invoked for quite some time. But Botak Chin was one of those who was punished, sentenced to death for carrying a firearm.
With the growing pressure to remove the death penalty, retentionists speak up on behalf of public safety.
I think the liberal movement is saying that the death penalty is ineffective. I would tend to disagree because many studies have shown that death penalty is an effective deterrent in many countries. And 70% of the world have death penalty put in place. It protects innocent civilians, and that's very important. You have studies conducted in America where it shows that one execution saves 5 to 13 lives, and one moratorium actually results in 5 murders. If you speed up execution, it actually has a deterrent effect.
If you believe the death penalty is a deterrent, then it should be continued. But if it is not sufficiently deterrent for any offense, for example, in particular drug trafficking, maybe you should not just sentence the person to death, give him life.
UN rights experts warn that the death penalty disproportionately affects the poor, who depend on overworked public defenders. So do the rich get off easier?
I don't believe so. The reason being that every person who is charged for an offense carrying death penalty is assigned a lawyer by the court, and the fees is paid by the government. Of course, in any crime, offense, or anything involving going to court, you have the money, you can choose your best lawyers to defend you, pay for the investigators, they can research the whole thing again, they can get the best lawyer or lawyers. But does not mean the poorer people are not guilty. They are also guilty.
Amongst the guilty is a former lawyer who hired 3 farmhands and murdered 4 victims for commercial greed.
Dr. Susilawati was killed together with her lawyer, driver, banker. Do you think the killers deserve to be pardoned? If the crime is murder involving loss of lives, the same punishment must be meted out. In Malaysia, the life sentence doesn't mean permanently in jail. No. The maximum sentence is 30 years. However, 30 years is not really 30 years because you have 1/3 remission under the Prisons Act. And then you got your time off in jail when the trial is ongoing. For murder, if you change that to 30 years, in actual fact, the person will be jailed to 5 to 6 years and he'll be out. Is that justice? Is that enough punishment when it comes to murder, terrorism, kidnapping involving loss of lives? I don't think so.
Retentionists believe that the government should first strengthen the legal and judicial system.
You see, to win a case, you need to prove a case beyond reasonable doubt. And the burden of proof is really high. The moment you have a bit of doubt, the whole case collapses. Just like in the Cradle case, just like in the HSBC bankers murder case, just like the Indonesian helper murder case. Hence, I asked the government to take a few steps back, to do a self-check on how to improve our legal and the justice system, on the law of evidence, how to allocate more resources, because I also think that our prosecution and police need to be equipped with more resources.
While the death penalty has played a role in the prevention of violent crimes from firearms and the devastating effect of the drug economy, some argue that an alternative sentence may not have the same deterrent effect.
In one of my cases, the hired killers were given 30,000 ringgit, and the hired killer was approached by the mastermind to kill. He approached 3 hired killers, of which the 3 rejected. They were witnesses because they said that they understand that there's death penalty involved. So if someone can say that to me, it is obviously an effective deterrent. But if you don't have the death penalty in place, and if seasoned hired killers know that judges don't hang, there is no law in place to protect victims of crimes. So you have a group of hired killers that can get 30K with the killings and still come out free after 10 years. This makes Malaysia a very dangerous place.
And although many welcomed the Malaysian Law Minister Dato Sri Wan Junaidi's announcement that the government has agreed to abolish the mandatory portion of the death sentence but retain the death sentence, the challenge is one of crime reduction and practical enforcement.
We, Malaysia, want to send a strong message that you don't kill our citizens, you don't rape and kill our children, you don't kidnap our businessmen, you don't hurt innocent person who's out walking around and have them killed. Because if you kill them, you have a serious consequences, which is death penalty. This is the message we need to send to Malaysia. The prosecution, the judges, even the police must take a tough stand on that. But to take a tough stand on that, you need the right tools. But in reality, the liberal lobbying for the law to be stripped and pushing for the law to be abolished to protect criminals. You don't see the movement where there's voices for victims of crimes, there's voices for 33 million of the Rakyat. You don't see babies who are raped and killed, but you see so many unsolved cases where victims of crimes are killed. Cases are not solved. Criminals are not being punished. We see more of that, but that's not told.